Coming to really our final panel, and I'm really excited to have the ladies here with me to be able to just not just respond to what Chandra has shared, but really as a non-profit sector. And I'm going to start with Chia-Lin. Chia-Lin wears multiple hats. She is both the chairman of HealthServe, which I think it's an incredible organization. She's a philanthropist, and she's also the vice president of NCSS. So literally, you are seeing three sectors all coming in one person. So I wanted to start with Chia-Lin, not just being the donor for the Lam Soon New Horizon Fund, but really more from the sector's point of view as well as a donor. What do you look for? What do you look for in the sector? What do you look for in the non-profits? There are many things that we want, and we're talking about creating new horizons. What risk should philanthropists or donors really consider? And sometimes when I talk about donors, I find myself juxtaposing as well as grant makers like government as well, right? We are quite risk averse when it comes to this sector. So what comes to your consideration? What do you think about as a funder, as someone who sees a sector point of view, and as someone as a donor?
First of all, thanks, Martin, for having me here this morning. I think there are three factors that I look at in thinking about the sector, or about the issues to be solved. First, I think is really the environment. It sounds cliched, but we really are facing, substantial challenges and change, whether it's demographics, whether it's digital transformation and disruption, or whether it's, economic and geopolitical challenges. So I think given these, the sort of tried and tested way of doing things, existing organizations, maybe it's not sufficient to solve the growing number of complex needs our society is going to face. So we really need to look beyond existing players. And sometimes you need to look outside the social service sector to solve social service sector problems, whether it's in terms of hiring people from outside the social service sector to come in to helm social service organizations or to work in teams within these organizations. Or it's about, looking for funders who, like the Singaporean who was working with Social Ventures Hong Kong, who come from outside the sector. He's not exactly working in the sector, but TMT founder Danny Yong is from outside the sector. So I think we need new lenses. And often, people from the corporate sector maybe act faster, act more nimbly, because it's typically more competitive in the private sector, and they respond faster to changing conditions. So that's one thing. The second, I think, factor really is about the life cycle of organizations. It's a known fact that actually innovations tend to happen more with startups. Organizations that have grown and are more mature tend to stick to the tried and tested. They tend to be more conservative. They're more concerned about guarding market share. This is true whether it's in the for-profit world or a non-profit. So it is really about, where you are in the life cycle. The other thing is also that governments tend to look at things from a top-down macro perspective. But some problems and some needs take time to surface. So it is really the ground-ups, the startups with their micro perspectives that will spot the problem or the need first. So, it's about the life cycle of organizations. And the third really is a generational issue. I think the Gen Zs and the millennials see things very differently, and they see things very differently from my generation when we were at their age. Their aspirations are different. The way they demand services and the way they want services delivered is different. This is especially so with digital transformation. And our kids are very different from us. And so with that, I think particularly in the area of youth work, that's important. Gasper Chan of SOS tells me that their text messaging system is very heavily used by youth. They don't call the hotline on the telephone. So I think it's a generational thing, and so that's from the point of view of whether it's you're catering to a different generation of service users, and it's also from the perspective of the people that may be founders, of ground-ups or startups to meet these needs. And I'll be the first to say the likes of May and Denise will be far better at harnessing technology to solve social needs than myself. Definitely. And I think the young also have, and startups tend to be, populated by the young. There are some exceptions. There are some people with very entrepreneurial mindsets. Martin is one, Eugene is another. But generally, the young tend to be more entrepreneurial, more risk-taking, whereas the older people, of course, are more conservative. So I know, those who can't may be fun, and those who can do.
Or do both. Eugene and I are just young at heart. That's the real. I really like the third point, which is the generation, because yes, we do see in the startup space, in the non-profit space, a lot of younger people coming in, and I think there's a major impetus, and it's really nice seeing them taking a step to say, I think I can make this my career. I think I can give my life to this. Sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes it's 5 years. And a lot of us is just trying to create the ecosystem. May, you are one of those young people. You are still working with MasterCard. And I know this has been a passion of yours for a while. So why don't we turn to you very quickly? How did you get Kampong Kaki started? And why do you do what you do? And just leveraging on what Jialin's point is, the innovation, the use of tech, and so on. So very quickly, tell us how did you get started?
Yeah, thanks so much, Martin, and thanks to the TMT team for inviting me here. And of course, thanks a lot, Charlene, for setting up this new fund, which is really important for us at Kampong Kakis. So Kampong Kakis, for the audience here that might not know, we're actually a neighborhood buddy system. So what we do is we've set up a platform that tries to pair volunteers, so it can be anyone in the neighborhood, with a neighbor that could be in need. It could be a stay-alone senior, it could be just low-income families that are falling through the cracks. And we started during the circuit breaker period, during the pandemic. It was actually a really personal story for me because I thought about the idea when I had COVID myself in the hospital. Thankfully, I had no Wi-Fi, so I couldn't be on my emails. And I spent the time, thinking of ideas and being creative about how we could really help the seniors in the community who are most at risk of contracting COVID stay safe by not having to go out to get food on their own. And at the same time, when I returned home from the hospital, I have a stay-alone senior neighbor, and I realized my own parents were providing meals to my neighbor and helping her go to the market so that she could be safe. And that was really what crystallized the idea of Kampong Kakis for me. And I actually took the idea out to pitch to many people. One of the groups that I first reached out to was actually a Tech 65 community. It's a Slack group that was set up by the Singapore Global Network that has Singaporeans and friends of Singapore in the tech community, in that Slack group. And I just posted my idea and asked for feedback, and people gave me contacts to reach out to. You should go and speak to your RC, go and speak to your CC, and that's where I got connected to my first co-founder, Michelle. She's actually my resident community chairperson. So she brought, and she's also a medical social worker, so she brought that perspective of the needs on the ground. She knew who we needed to reach out to on the ground. And I came in with my expertise in tech. So I was a product manager in MasterCard for almost 5 years. And I went to Cornell Tech, and that's where my startup mentality and my passion for iterating on ideas came from. And we just put the two together, and that's how we started Kampong Kakis in my neighborhood. And very quickly, Denise, my third co-founder, joined us, and she's a growth hacker. She's a product growth person, and that's where we really took it out of the pilot and scaled across Singapore.
And I like the story because it really links to what Charlene you were talking about, that sometimes you bring people from the outside to see from a different perspective and so on. There are so many different ways of starting something and so many different ways of looking at a problem. And one of the things about young people, because they're so digitally native, they tend to see solutions very differently. And I think, Shanru, that's your experience. I'm gonna take a wild bet that your team, that you are working with, that have come on board, were all young people coming together. What is it?
Yeah, definitely at the start, I would say in the first 3 to 5 years, I was pretty much the oldest. And but I think that was important at the start, because when you have limited resources, it's quite difficult to get more senior people in. Yeah. I think the most so-called senior were the co-founders, and honestly, we were not even senior. It was just maybe senior in terms of age, but if you're talking about tech experience, I mean, back then I only had barely a year, so it was really not experienced at all. I think what we found was very interesting about young people was that, not knowing anything, as long as they had that attitude where they really wanted to grow, they were willing to push boundaries. I think that was really what we needed, especially at the start. We still do need that, but I think as we scaled up and now we're in 10 markets and a lot of a larger organization, I think in the past 3 to 4 years, we've actually been bringing in more experienced hires, because we realized that we have different gaps. I mean, you can't have a bunch of kids just always going hard and trying to brute force everything in terms of rolling stuff out. You also need different diverse people from diverse backgrounds to come in and kind of try to pull you back and say hey, divert your energies to this path. And I think that has been very useful also to embrace the different kind of backgrounds and even seniorities, and tap on really rich experiences, and not just think that we just always want this type of people who just want to hack growth.
One of the conversations that we would love to have, and I'm mindful of time, because you made in your presentation about culture misfit to a certain extent, but culture evolve. How difficult it is for you, and I'm also going to bring Charlie into the conversation, because sometime in the nonprofit sector for us, as we evolve and as we change, sometimes the people that start with us, or sometimes the people who have been in the organization for a while, all of a sudden find themselves, hey, I don't feel quite right in this place anymore, or they're not at the same speed or the same pace and so on. How do we transit people? We are in a very loving sector, but it's an important conversation. And from a corporate world, maybe hiring, firing is an easier thing, but I can't imagine for a startup like yours, where you have founding team members or people who have been with you, and then all of a sudden they no longer are in the right space. How do you deal with that?
So I think we look at culture, or we look at fits in terms of performance and culture. So I think for us, culture is very important. So I would say that even as our culture evolves, it won't go too out of whack that we suddenly feel hey, people from who have grown with us are suddenly out of they no longer fit. It's more of maybe sometimes skills change, or if you're growing at a pace where the company is growing too fast compared to how you're growing, then there are certain tough conversations that need to happen. And I think how we try to deal with that is to really keep it real with each other and say hey, what is important to you right now, and where do you want to get to? Because let's say if we need someone who's at this level, but you're currently like that, you can't expect to, just be given that title simply because you're with us since the start. So I think for everyone to have that maturity to know that even if, let's say you're a co-founder, or even if you're a member of the founding team, it doesn't mean that you always need to be at the top of the tier of command. I think personally for me, I've never been I always need to call the shots. I'm okay to be an individual contributor sometimes. Yeah. I'm okay to lead certain small teams. So it's about understanding where your strengths lie and playing that to the company's needs. And of course, having the right people who are not too prideful. Yep. I think if you have certain people who are I don't care, I always need to be at the top, then that's when sometimes we have to part ways. Yeah, because that kind of culture fit is no longer there.
Charlene, I want to bring you in, because for us in the social sector, that's one conversations we do have. Sometimes we grow and the competency changes to a certain extent. How would you recommend for us who are starting organization building, and there are going to be times where we grow, we have to deal with this problem. So what are your quick thoughts on this?
Social service organizations or social purpose entities are always started by people with a very strong passion for doing good, of serving, the vulnerable. But that's not sufficient. That's not sufficient for the organization to grow and to sustain itself. I think it's really important that having founded an organization, the founders then need to decide, do we want to remain very small, very grassrootsy, or do we want to be able to scale up and grow to meet the need in a bigger way? And having decided that, if you decide on the latter, which is you want to be able to scale up to meet the need, then I think it's non-negotiable that you have to focus on organizational development.
Yeah.
You can't just be spending all your time hiring counselors or social workers. You have to hire volunteer managers, HR managers, donor engagement managers. You need a management team. You need database systems. You need to, set up standard operating procedures. You need to instill a culture of compliance. In other words, you need to become corporatized.
Yep.
It may sound like a bad word in the social service sector. Oh, we've got people from the private sector coming in. The organization's going to become very corporate.
Yep.
I think that's a good thing. But then it's a corporate with a social mission. Social service organizations should be corporates with a social mission as the key objective, unlike for-profits, which have profits as the objective. So I think it's non-negotiable. Unfortunately, I think for the sector, donors themselves are not so willing to fund these functions, to fund the corporate office.
Yep.
They want to fund a program, they want to fund giving to the beneficiaries. Why is that so? I guess maybe because it's easier to track the KPIs,
Yep.
right? How many people have you fed? How many people have you served? How many people have you counseled? And giving to the organization, the impact of the organization, if measured, takes a much longer time to evaluate. But then I would encourage donors really to recognize that need and to give in an unrestricted manner.
Yep.
And speaking from personal experience at HealthServe, in our earlier years, we were really, really blessed to have had two or three foundations and a corporate who gave us multi-year funding, general funding, no KPIs. I think that you take a bet. To do that, you really need to get to know the organization, the board, the leadership team, and you take a bet on the people. So in a way, it is like VC funding, right? It's a concept, you bet on the people and you trust the people to deliver
Yep.
on your money.
And I like to think that of all the different sectors, the social sector, the charity sector is one that you can really bet on people because they come with so much passion and want to do so much good. And this is the part where I do want to say the work that NCSS is doing in the capacity building, in creating the resource for bringing people in with what we're doing at the 4ST plays a big part in the conversation.
Yeah. If you can just give me 2 minutes, and with your indulgence and Danny's indulgence, I'll put in a marketing spiel for NCSS. Some of you may know in 2020 we launched a Community Capability Trust, and this really was a collaboration with MSF and with additional support from Tote Board. Initial funding of 230 million, really to support organizations in the sector on building, their capability and the capacity, spending on organizational development, which we recognize was harder to raise money from. And we also have got a organizational health framework for social services, where organizations can go in and do the assessment and see where their gaps are, and then apply to this trust for funding to improve themselves in the areas where they're lacking in. One last minute. Donations to the CCT, will be matched 2-to-1 up to 2024. ComChest is raising money for this. So for the donors out there, if you want to support this area, CCT is one area to support. The other area is you can join me on the New Horizon Fund.
Yay!
This should be an ongoing fund.
Absolutely.
We've just, seeding it and get it going, but I really think, this should be an evergreen fund.
Yep. And we're excited because it's a growing sector. We're seeing more of these things coming up. And with 3 board members plus the CE of NCSS here, we'll be more than happy to indulge 2 minutes to talk about the work with NCSS. Time is running out very quickly. I don't want to end without going back to May. We talked very quickly about investing in people, and the New Horizon Fund is investing in folks like yourself. Where can and where will this fund help you grow? I think that's one thing to crystallize for everyone who's listening. And sometimes we see money as just a dollar sign, but money represents progress. Money represents some things that you needed to do but you cannot have. So with this fund, what is helping you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Martin. So, I think we've seen reports out there that the aging population problem is a real thing for us. There are going to be 900,000 seniors above the age of 65 by 2030. And there aren't that many caregivers or young people to take care of a lot of these seniors. I'm going to be one of these seniors one day as well.
60 years'
So,
time.
Yeah, so it's a real problem for us. And I think, to what Charlie mentioned just now, it's either us as Kampong Kakis remain as a small grassroots organization, or we scale and try and solve this problem. And I think for my co-founders and my team, now that we have 20 people in the core team, we've jointly decided that we do want to scale Kampong Kakis to solve these problems, to alleviate loneliness amongst our seniors. And so this funding, like Charlie mentioned, is really helpful for us because we started sort of like a tech nonprofit, right? We developed a platform, and to sustain this platform and for all the softwares that we are using, we really need this kind of flexible funding for us to continue to use these softwares. And then we are also hoping to hire our first full-timer so that we can have more dedicated focus on the management side of things, becoming that corporate that we aspire to be, and hopefully scale up and have more human resources from there. And I think, there are so many problems, like Bill was mentioning, we are falling in love with the problem, and there are so many ways to solve the problem as well. So we're hoping to really expand our program. Right now, we're a buddy system, and now, we're exploring other initiatives, for example, solving the medical escort issues where seniors are not able to go for their appointments because there's no one to bring them to these appointments. So we're exploring all these different problems that surround the needs of our seniors, and we really need flexible funding in order to do so. So, yeah.
That's awesome. You encapsulate what I think Bill was talking about earlier. What you have now is you fell in love with the problem, and you're looking at many different ways of how can we reach out and solve the problem together. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please put your hands to thank our panelists. Thank you very, very much.